Throughout his career, Minister Mick has made social justice initiatives one of his priorities. He's placed a focus on helping vulnerable Queenslanders with housing support and making sure that hundreds of thousands of families who depend on the state's construction industry have a strong, reliable pipeline of work. Mick is committed to working collaboratively with the housing and homelessness sector and to improve outcomes for Queenslanders who most need the support and a secure and sustainable, safe and affordable housing. Would you please give a warm welcome to Minister Mick de Brenni.
Thanks so much, Kay. It's wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts this morning and talk a little bit about the housing strategy and the intersection of housing and homelessness and, of course, domestic and family violence. Before I get into that, though, I want to acknowledge Uncle Desmond. Thank you for welcoming us here this morning. I, too, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of where we meet this morning and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And in particular, I acknowledge that working very closely with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to address homelessness, there is an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who experience homelessness is a very, very key part of reconciliation, not just here in Queensland, but right across this nation. And it's both the physical homelessness, but also the spiritual homelessness that comes from being separated from their country and from their kin, which makes the important work of addressing homelessness for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people such an important part of reconciliation. I want to, of course, acknowledge Kay. Kay has dedicated so much of her time to supporting other people in this state, particularly now through her role as the chair of the Domestic and Family Violence Implementation Committee. Thank you, Kay, and it's one of Kay has been at a few events just in the last couple of weeks that I've seen where we've had the opportunity to talk about housing and homelessness, and so it's wonderful to see such a great ambassador of Queensland being involved in this very important issue. Of course, to Adam and Maria, where are you now? They're down there. Great to see you again. Congratulations, Maria, on your appointment. I know you're going to continue to do amazing things in this space. To everybody that's here, the coalition partners, the supporters, and I want to do a special shout out to the staff, both young and not so young, of the Department of Housing and Public Works, who are really dedicated to modernising the way that we support people experiencing homelessness and deliver better housing. So let's get into it. There's no single pathway into homelessness. There's no single pathway out of homelessness either. And it's important that those pathways out of homelessness respond to the individual needs and circumstances of those who find themselves homeless. And a few weeks ago, I met with some young people out in Ipswich. Is anyone here from Ipswich? Great to see some Switchies here. And I was working with an organisation out there called In Community, and they're working to support tenancies. And I just want to share, and this morning during my address, I'm going to share some of the things that, and some of the programs that I've seen that I think are really exciting and are really emblematic of the different way that we're starting to approach these issues in Queensland. So with the help of In Community, last week I helped to launch the Tenancy Skills Institute tenancy training program down in my home neighbourhood of Logan. Who is from Logan? Yeah, all the best people are from Logan. So that's being delivered from In Community. So I saw it out in Ipswich and we brought it to Logan. And the Tenancy Skills Institute is an amazing thing. And I heard from some people after it who saw the things that I'd said about the program. They said, why do we need a training program to teach people how to be a good tenant? No, didn't their parents teach them how to look after a house? And for people who've grown up in stable housing, with a stable family, people who've had caring and supportive families all their lives, they probably seem like obvious questions to ask, right? Why do people need to be taught those things? But I reckon everybody here in this room can answer why. I reckon everybody here in this room, from your experiences and the people that you've met with, and probably things that you've lived through yourself, you can explain why it's like that if you don't grow up in stable housing. You can explain it if you know people who don't have supportive and attentive parental role models. And you know why the simple stuff isn't simple at all. Because if what you're learning from your parents is how to gauge Dad's mood when he gets home from the pub, if what you're learning as a kid growing up in your house is where the best place to hide is when he's on a rampage, or if what you're learning is how far away from home you can run and how long it takes you to get to somewhere that's safe when you need to get out of the way, the time that you invest in learning those skills instead of learning those basic skills to maintain a tenancy paints the picture of why it can be really, really difficult and why the simple isn't simple at all. Things like how to keep your place clean, how to clean an oven, how to budget for rent, how to pay for utilities, how to get utilities turned on and off. Even just realising that it might make sense to mow the lawn on the day that everyone else in the street mows the lawn, or at least on the day before your rental inspection is due. But a program like the Tenancy Skills Institute is an example of how innovative responses from specialist support services, in that case that was one supported with funding by our government, it shows how they can be the difference between a sustainable tenancy where somebody does have secure housing, or a different picture which is repeated evictions due to tenancy breaches. And you know what? That program absolutely works. It seems really simple, but it absolutely works. I met a young woman, her name was Annalise, she's a young mum, and she's just recently graduated from the Tenancy Skills Institute. And for the first time in her life, she moved out of her home, and for the first time took away 100% of her bond and moved straight into another home of her choice. She's got a good tenancy record. She's got her bond back. You know, this has given her choices that she has never had, and this gives her the opportunities that thousands of young people don't get to have. That financial security and the security of having choices. So a key part of our housing strategy, along with building new homes, was to outline clear pathways through what we know as the housing continuum. And so what the Tenancy Skills Institute program does is light a pathway from supported housing, where Annalise started off, into independent private rental, from where she's able to raise her kids and get a job. What that shows is that it supports people to advance and to achieve. And for many young people, successfully managing tenancies in the private rental market is something that you think it is the end goal at that stage of their lives. There's probably not too many young people these days who expect to leave home and buy, or the first house that they move into is one that they buy. And I think there are many adults who also expect these days to become lifetime renters. And while some choose to do that for their own reasons, there's no doubt that housing affordability is a key reason for that. I'm not going to go into the debate about housing affordability today, but certainly if we're talking about young people, I think even if ownership is a long-term aspiration, for most people there is a real aspiration for their home that they rent to be one that they're able to do successfully and independently. And so I mentioned earlier that lighting clear pathways along the continuum is a key part of the housing strategy. And social housing is also an important step on the housing continuum. And that's why, as a Labor government, we're absolutely committed to being responsible for continuing to deliver social housing in this state, because it does provide safe, secure and a stable platform for many Queenslanders who would otherwise find it very difficult, if impossible, to sustain housing in the private market. But until very recently, our housing system has had a range of inbuilt disincentives, and some we're still clearing out of the system. And most importantly, though, a lot of those inbuilt disincentives impacted on young people more than anybody, and impacted on their ability to move into the private rental market. The first requirement, the first one of these disincentives, is around qualifying for social housing. So you'll know that a household income has to be under a certain level to qualify. Now that's fair. We've got to make sure that social housing is targeted at those who need it the most, right? But here's the catch. For a young person in a low-income family, income pressures, not having enough food to eat, not being able to buy clothes, their pressure's enough just to go out and try and find some work, part-time work after school or when you finish school to get into some work. Whether it's a full-time job, casual or whatever it might be alongside study. But there's this inbuilt disincentive into our housing system that actively prevented young people from going out and getting that job. And I'll tell you what it is, that their income would be included in the household income. And too often the result was that pushed the their household income over the eligibility level, which meant that their family no longer qualified for that housing support. It's pretty hard to believe when you think about it. What we did for decades in Queensland was make teenagers make the choice between having somewhere safe for them and their parents to live or getting a job. A home, being homeless, or having a job. And that's why I'm very proud of our Youth to Work initiative. What that initiative means, that's now operational, it means that people under 25 who grew up in social housing can go out and get a job, and their income won't be calculated as part of that household income for that eligibility test. That's great news. Now, whether that means that they can save for a deposit, or even if they can save up for a bond for their own place, or perhaps it means they can buy a car, go and get some driving lessons. And I've got a bit of a story about that in a moment. But your first job should be a stepping stone to something bigger. It shouldn't be a millstone around your neck that stops you from advancing. And a step towards housing security and independence should be supported. It shouldn't be thwarted by policy settings. And I hope the Youth Housing Coalition will continue to identify those policy settings that government should change to make that continuum and that movement along that pathway clearer for Queenslanders. So speaking of learning to drive, and I mentioned that I wanted to talk about some of the funding programs that I've been really inspired by. I introduced in my previous term as Minister for Housing funding programs based around a simple principle, is that people experiencing homelessness should deserve to live with dignity. So alongside the housing construction, which is a big package, $1.6 billion worth of housing construction, alongside the specialist support services that are here in this room that are funded by the Queensland Government, there are smaller ideas, hundreds, maybe thousands of small ideas that can make a big difference, and often they don't cost a lot of money at all. So through 2 rounds of our Dignity First program, we funded 53 of these innovative projects across the state. And the one I'm going to talk about is a unique little program just outside of Toowoomba. There was someone here from Toowoomba, so you might know about this program. It's about a place called The Haven. You've probably heard of it. It's a home for young people who would otherwise be making the choice between homelessness or staying in a home where there was an abusive relationship. And if you've been out in Toowoomba this time of year, it was probably pretty cold when you left there this morning. And so you know what young people do? They make the choice to stay in the abusive relationship because it's impossible to sleep rough in places like Toowoomba. So The Haven's a little house and it has rooms for about 6 or 8 young people while they finish school. Now, the organisation that created The Haven applied to our Dignity First Fund to buy a used car, and we gave them that funding. But the importance is the car was used as a practice vehicle for young people to learn how to drive. And then local volunteers are supervising them, getting up to, I think it's got to get 100 hours these days to complete to get their licence. But here's the best bit. The owner of the local servo down the road heard about the program and he said, well, I'm going to give you discounted petrol. And so what we saw was the community getting behind this. But then he went one better. Now that some of those young people have their own licence and can get to and from work under their own steam, he's actually given some of them a job working behind the counter in his service station. And so what that one little initiative of buying that used car means is that these young people are able to gain that independence. They're able to find their own secure housing. And it's important because without a licence, she can't get to work. And in the case of most jobs, having a licence is a prerequisite for being hired. And so for young people, we all know that young people more and more rely on casual shifts, being able to get to work early in the morning or late at night when there's no public transport. Having a licence is crucial for having that income security, and having income security is fundamental to paying your rent. And so the whole program, as simple as it is, does much more than give kids the thrill of finally getting their driver's licence. What it is actually doing is protecting them against future homelessness. And so the young people who've come to live at the Haven have all started from different points. Some have literally been physically homeless, sleeping rough. Many of them were dealing with hidden homelessness, which we know all too well, the kind of kids that are couch surfing, living in situations that are just untenable. Homes where there's violence, where the violence is inside the home, is around the home, outside the home. And we know that that stuff leaves its mark. But it's good work that's being done in Toowoomba and so many other places. Earlier I talked about the tenancy skills program and young people who haven't learnt the opportunities and the skills like paying rent or mowing the lawn or keeping the kitchen clean. And you often see that with young people who've lived through domestic and family violence. The other way that domestic and family violence leaves its mark is through blacklisting. And this seems to disproportionately affect women in Queensland. And so I just want to talk about one of my earliest decisions that I took as Minister for Housing, and one of the ones that to this day I'm still most proud of. It was to deliver a change in the rules to the way that tenancy databases were managed in Queensland. If you've experienced it, you'll know that blacklisting on a tenancy database is a really, really difficult barrier to get past. If you're trying to rent a home and you're on a blacklist, you've pretty much got no chance. But when it's your abusive partner who's caused you to be on that tenancy blacklist, when it was that abusive partner that put the holes in the walls or broke the windows in a fit of rage or whatever happened, it was just, I found it completely unjust that it should be you as the victim that should be knocked back from being able to rent a home, somewhere else to go. It was almost like the system sent you back to the perpetrator. Now, if you've been blacklisted today through the actions of your ex-partner, at QCAT you can have that listing removed. And here's another change. If you're placed on that tenancy blacklist, you have to be notified. Previously, we had a situation in Queensland where women would flee domestic and family violence and they'd end up homeless for long periods. Their rental applications would be knocked back, they'd go along with the kids, check out a new rental, and they'd just get knocked back. And there'd never be any explanation. They didn't know why, because they didn't know that they'd been put on this blacklist because of what happened in the last home. And so that was a relatively small change, but it addresses a profound injustice that had perpetuated in Queensland for years and years. And what it did was result in fewer women and children becoming homeless. So we're very proud of that. And the changes that we're making to renting in Queensland are especially relevant to young people. The vast majority of young people are going to rent at some point. It's a fact. Probably for most of you it's going to be in share houses more often than renting solo. And when young people get out of home and start renting, it is obviously at the start of our adult lives. And as I said before, successful tenancies at that time in your life can set you up for the future. But if you have that patchy rental history, it can take you years to get past. It can be the difference between, getting on with advancing your career or finishing your study or making choices or being stuck in a rut. And so programs like those offered by the Tenancy Skills Institute make a huge difference. Policy settings like the Youth to Work program make a huge difference. Homeless providers can assist people with wraparound services. Even small initiatives like the Havens Driving program is making huge differences. But when I look around at the Queensland rental system, probably when many of you look around and your own experience with the Queensland rental system, I think that we can do much, much better. And what I want to hear from our community in 2018 is what is the changes that tenants in rental properties in Queensland want to see in our system. At our last election, only about 7 months ago, we committed to a wide-ranging review of the rental system here in this state. And we will release a discussion paper before the 30th of June this year, and my invitation to everybody, particularly those of you here in this room, but it'll be an open invitation to everybody in Queensland, is to contribute to that reform of the way that we rent in Queensland. I want you to encourage your networks to contribute as well. Because the changes that we make to tenancy law, even simple little changes that we've made, like the examples around the tenancy blacklisting, will have a profoundly more significant impact on young people than anybody else in our community. And so I want to hear from you about things like security of tenure. What rights do you have to stay in your home? I want to hear from you about the lengths of your tenancies. I want to hear from you about flexibility that you might like in your rental arrangements. I want to hear more about how we can support Queenslanders who find it difficult to get into the rental market to find a way in. I want to find out from you your ideas about how we make sure our tenancy laws don't shut people out of renting their first home. So it's going to be a big piece of work, but I'm looking forward to your contributions. And I want to conclude, but in doing so, I want to acknowledge the work of everybody here in this room to contributing to better housing outcomes for all Queenslanders, but particularly for young people. I want to acknowledge all of your work, but particularly the work that you've done for those people who are experiencing homelessness. And today, of course, particularly for those people who have experienced domestic and family violence. This is important and ongoing work, and it will take all of us here in this room, and it's going to take more than all of us here in this room to make the changes we need to. But I think we are moving in the right direction. And if we keep moving in that right direction, if we continue to work together in collaboration, we will make good progress. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you what has inspired me and continues to inspire me to act as Queensland's Housing Minister. I hope you enjoy the conversations and have a great day.